Hi.
Thanks for coming today. So we're going to be talking about homebrewing mechanics for therapeutic purposes. I'm Rosa Robertson, an LGPC licensed graduate professional counselor.
And I'm Keir Hudson. I'm an LMSW, licensed master of social work.
And if you don't have a therapy background, don't know what all those wild letters are, basically what that means is we both completed our master's programs and we have a license. We're just in that period of extra supervision before having a full license.
One thing before we begin, does everyone have one of the sheets for the evaluation sheets? Does everyone have one of those?
No one has.
No one has one of those. Okay.
Or maybe
It looks like somebody is preparing to pass those out. No. We're not.
you have been voluntold.
Yeah. Apologies for volunteering you, but also thank you very much for your service. We salute you.
Be prepared over here. Yeah. Anybody else need one?
Yeah.
We all do.
Thank
Thanks
everybody.
very much.
Thank you. Thank you. No, fill them all out.
One other thing that we wanted to note before we began is we are planning on allowing questions throughout. So if anyone does have a question at any point during the workshop, just raise a hand or in some other way indicate, maybe just incoherent screaming, whatever. But just indicate in some way that you have a question, and we'll call on you when we're ready to take the question. But feel free to do that throughout.
So the objectives for today are that by the end of this, you'll be able to identify at least 2 methods of designing mechanics for role-playing game systems for therapeutic benefit. You'll be able to design at least 1 original mechanic to address therapeutic goals, and that you'll be able to implement homebrew mechanics to support therapeutic progress. So to get started, some terms.
So we did have a few terms that we wanted to make sure we conveyed, just to make sure that everyone has a baseline. We're all, kind of coming from the same understanding of what these terms are meaning in this context. So the first term that we had was mechanics. In this context, many of you may already have this context, but just to make sure, mechanics are just ways in which that you can achieve a desired result. Often through randomization or something to that effect within your game. So for example, dice rolling is a mechanic that allows for randomization within a game and can be utilized to achieve the result of perceived randomness. Homebrewing is basically just coming up with your own rules outside of the established rules of a particular game system. So for example, D&D 5e, there's the written rules, and then you can also have additional homebrew rules that you can add in that would achieve a desired result outside of what's already baked into the system as a whole. Therapeutic goals, basically just goals for therapy, things that you are trying to achieve through a therapeutic process. Usually they would be written out in some sort of format with SMART goals. So, for example, being achievable, time relevant, stuff like that. Measurable is often very desirable. Rules-light RPGs are role-playing games that are specifically designed to have very minimal rules as written out. Oftentimes these are very modular. We'll get to modularity in a moment. Rules-light RPGs are often very boiled down, have very minimal presence in terms of in terms of the rules themselves that are written out in the rulebook. And then modularity is the ability of a system to have various parts either integrated into it or taken out of it without much effect on the system as a whole. So for example, you could have a rule that could be very easily added into a rule set without changing anything, or taken away from that rule set, and it still doesn't change the overall experience very much or disrupt any sort of gameplay. All right, so one of the things that we did want to also talk about was tunnel goons. So a lot of, part of what kind of gave us the idea for all this was the fact that the rule set that we've been using in many of our groups has been Tunnel Goons, or actually in all of our groups, has been a rule set called Tunnel Goons. It was developed by Nate Treem. It is a rules light RPG that was designed specifically with modularity in mind. So one aspect that was very appealing to us is that it's very simple. It's very much something that you can kind of take someone, take it and present it to someone who has no real experience with RPGs previously, and teach it to them in like under 15 minutes. In addition, it was also designed with modularity in mind, so that way, basically, if you want to add on to it, there isn't much to take away. But if you want to add on to it, then you can very easily add on extra rules, and it doesn't disrupt much of the game system as a whole. The rules do fit on a single page. They are free, by the way. If anyone wants to check out Tunnel Goons, if you just Google it, I think the URL is just like tunnelgoons.com or something to that effect. And you can download the rules for free. They fit on a single page, and again, very easy to present to someone with no experience or very little experience in RPGs, and explain the concepts and be able to play something again in like under 15 minutes. I believe that's everything there.
So one of the things we have noticed that maybe you should have addressed, but we keep saying we both work at Advanced Behavioral Health. We've been working there together for over a year at this point.
Right, at this point, yeah.
You have. I haven't been there as long. But we've been working together for about a year and a half at this point, and so the two of us together have run 4 groups at this point. The first one was a high school group, and the main focuses in that one were social skills and self-confidence. Second one, also high school, with social skills, self-reflection and personal growth, and vulnerability as main focuses. The third group was transitional adult, so that's like 18 to 25. In reality, I think we had 18 to 21. And with that, the focus was social skills, self-care, and strengthening relationships. And group 4 was middle school-ish. We ended up with ages 11 to 15. And that was, again, social skills, and as well as teamwork, acceptance of strengths and weaknesses, and didn't put that up there, but conflict resolution as well. You may notice a fun little theme of social skills here. Groups are great for that, especially role-playing game groups, and so that's been a consistent focus with other themes added in based off of who specifically was in the groups. We have used homebrew mechanics in every single one of these to help with those therapeutic goals. So with the first group, we had affirmation-based magic. And so what that meant was to use magic in some way, you had to say a self-affirmation that pertained to your character. So it's kind of building on that self-confidence. Come up with whatever you want to do magically, have some sort of self-affirmation that relates to the magic you want to do. So for example, if you want to do some sort of protection, shield, that type of thing, we had someone say, I protect those I care about, and that type of self-affirmation. For group 2, we did spark sharing. That was to help with the relationships part and vulnerability. With spark sharing, what we did was, so there's mechanics in it. Spark sharing was incentivized by lowering the difficulty score for what they rolled, so what they had to roll was lower. But the therapeutic side of it was they each rolled together, and so and they were psychically linked. The characters narratively were psychically linked in the moment, and so they shared what the other person would have experienced in that close connection in the moment while they're casting magic. For group 3, we used spark sharing again, and then we were also focusing on self-care, and so we also had self-care points. So similar to health points with your physical health, and those can get knocked down for various reasons, and you have to build them back up in one way or another. Self-care points, they started with 10. Just by existing, your self-care points decreased. If there was something stressful that happened, that could also make it decrease. And then they had to tell us what self-care their character is doing to help build that back up, with the real-life connection of if you don't take care of your self-care, it's going to start to affect your rolls. And then group 4, again, we went back to affirmation-based magic with the younger kids again. So when you're making these, there are some things to keep in mind. So one of them is very simply just what is the purpose of the mechanic that you're using? Why are you doing it? What are you hoping to achieve from it? Also, how does the mechanic bridge the gap between the narrative and the therapeutic goals? So how does it factor into how you're actually telling the story? We've been in fantasy worlds, which is why adding magic-based things can be very easy to build in with that. And so that's kind of making that connection there. Does the level of complexity of the mechanic match the complexity of the rest of the system? Tunnel Goons, as Keir mentioned, is very rules light. So adding a mechanic that had too much going on with it would have been disproportionate with the complexity. And so what we had was relatively simple as well for adding stuff in. Will introducing the new mechanic disrupt the existing system or narrative, or is there a way to achieve the desired result? So is adding this in going to completely change how you have to do the other things? Is it going to add in too much extra to consider that it's going to disrupt how you're telling the story and what else you're doing in this space and in the narrative? And is the mechanic set up in a way that characters will want to use it? So incentivize the mechanic. Is it set up in a way that it makes sense and has some benefit? Or is it just gonna feel like it's getting in the way and not helpful to their fun?
So, real quick, are there any questions, just to make sure, are there any questions so far or any thoughts that anyone wants to share before we continue?
So can you explain a little bit more about spark sharing? Is it a mechanic within the game that I'm just not familiar with that term?
No, so we came up with it.
Okay.
So the different sparks are based in Magic the Gathering magical systems, courtesy of Keir. The main goal of it was to get them to connect and to be more vulnerable with identifying what are you thinking and feeling in that moment and then sharing that with somebody else. And so narratively, the two people that are doing magic together are connecting on a deeper level. And so that's where sharing what does the other person experience in that moment. So we had a situation where I don't remember the exact specifics of it, but they were doing they're in a forest setting, and so one person was experiencing his memory of the forest and the growth within the forest and the changes that are there, and the other one was sharing about what was going on connected to like his family and his journey to where he was. And so like sharing kind of that deeper, whatever they're experiencing with each other. And then we reward that by having it be a lower score that they have to hit with their 2 dice. Well, mechanics note, in Tunnel Goons, you roll 2d6, and that's add whatever modifiers. And so with spark sharing, you're also rolling 2d6, but each person is rolling 1. But then it's a lower DC that you have to hit. Any other questions before we continue?
All right. So there are several approaches that we identified in terms of specific ways to integrate new mechanics into a game, or otherwise find a way to have mechanics that in some way support therapeutic benefit for the clients. The first of the approaches is specifically working from the system. Sometimes you don't even need to create a new mechanic. There's already something within the RPG system that you're using that in some way has therapeutic benefit for the clients. So with spark sharing, as we kind of just mentioned, it is something that technically already exists within the system. With any given roll in Tunnel Goons, you're just rolling 2d6, adding appropriate modifiers, and then trying to hit a number that is, success or failure with the roll. So we didn't really change anything about the actual mechanics of it, but what we did was we said, okay, what if instead of one person rolling 2 dice, it's 2 people rolling 1 die each? And then the way that we incorporate, and then the idea originally came from, okay, how do we foster connection between the players, but the actual act of, again, each player rolling one of the 2d6, and then the narrative act of describing what is my character thinking and feeling right now to the other player as the two characters kind of link in that way, supports the therapeutic benefit of gaining the ability to be vulnerable with other people and really share with other people in that way. There are other examples that are more baked into the original intent. For example, I believe it's in Mouse Guard. There's also other systems that do this as well, but having something like an inspiration point system, except it can be used for the benefit of other players. So is everyone familiar with inspiration points in 5e already?
Yeah.
Looking for any shaking heads just to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
I was just going to say, the example, it's relevant, but like, I was working with the therapist and they were trying to use 5e and they had a combat, and the goal was to get force the characters to deal with the conflicts they have between each other. And so what I did with it was it was a Hydra with 3 heads, but instead of being a traditional Hydra, each of its heads was able to concentrate on a Crown of Madness spell, essentially. So just using the spells in the game and the concentration mechanic, but the players either had to figure out why they were fighting each other or attack the creature to break its concentration and help their friends. If that makes sense. So like just saying like, it's not necessarily changing the rules.
Right.
It's just deploying them in a specific.
Yeah, using something that already exists, but just having it work towards the therapeutic goals in that manner. And again, like with inspiration points in 5e, at least rules is written, to my understanding, it's something that the player has an inspiration point they can use to re-roll their own dice. In some other systems, they can use it to re-roll their own dice or another person's dice. And once you introduce the concept of I can benefit someone else with this action and use of resources, there's no real reason not to. And you do have the limited resource, but it opens up a whole new dimension of, okay, I can benefit somebody else with this, and while I do want to watch my resource, I have no reason not to, especially if it's a role that affects the entire party. So once you add that in to a person's consciousness of the rules, it very much makes it something that kind of allows them to explore new options and kind of primes them to experience different aspects of the game that could be more therapeutically beneficial depending on what the goals are. I believe I saw some other hands. Were there any other questions regarding this aspect?
We were being rude and talking over you, but one of the things that we mentioned is that in 5e that you could also force the DM to re-roll with it, and then also I think Kids on Bikes has that very similar mechanic too, where you can assist someone else with your types of points that it's in there, like because that system. I apologize for going off real quick, but on their thing, it's almost like some of the players are hamstrung, so that you are going to fail, and the failures that you get give you those adversary tokens, those points that you can then use later on, or assist somebody else. So it's made to do like that, so that you can learn from the failure, accept the failure, and then also help other people, so that it becomes a collaborative effort to win.
Right. Yeah, and I think those are both really good examples. I didn't actually know that rules was written, inspiration points could be used to have the DM reroll something. And I think pointing that out to people, saying, okay, this is something that you can use in this way, again, primes them to have that in mind and then potentially do that. And again, that action is a manner of practicing those skills. And then also, again, I think also the idea of gaining something upon a failure so that you learn from that, again, simulating the learning from that failure is definitely something that I think I was familiar with. Actually, I think that was mentioned earlier today in a different workshop.
Actually, you weren't sitting in this room. I think we were talking about that it's that you can still learn from failing.
Right.
Something along those lines, but yeah.
Right, and again, that is a rules is written mechanic that the way it is written encourages therapeutic benefit, not necessarily by intent. I'm sure Wizards of the Coast did not say, oh, you can roll you can have the DM reroll a die with an inspiration point because that will be therapeutic, but that's definitely not their intent. But at the same time, you can use these things that might not have therapeutic benefit in mind when they were written, but still can have that end result for clients.
So another approach when coming up with the homebrew elements is working from the goals, which is kind of what I was highlighting earlier with the different goals of the group and what mechanics we added in. And so self-care points and affirmation magic are both very specifically working from the goals with that. As I was describing with self-care points, it's just through living life. You lose a little bit of you lose some of your self-care points every day, and you have to specifically work to add it back up. Otherwise, it does have mechanical consequences later on. And then the self-care can reflect what is specific to that character, what people could do in real life, and all of that just to help with that connection. And then affirmation magic as well, working from the goal of self-confidence, recognizing your strengths, those types of things. The affirmation magic says, I can do this because I am this way. I have this positive quality about me, and allows them to have fun with magic while they're doing it.
One thing to note really quickly with the self-care points, if anyone's played Vampire the Masquerade, it's very similar to blood points in how it works, just in case that helps with anyone's conceptualization of how it works. We'll also go over it a little bit more in detail later on because it's one of the ones that we chose to use as an example. Spoiler alert, sorry. But it's very similar to that mechanic in that way. It is something that Rosa actually came up with originally without having any knowledge of Vampire the Masquerade, but it's very similar in the mechanics of how it works. So the third approach that we came up with is working from the clients. Sometimes you have things that are already rules as written. Sometimes you have things that you as a therapist can say, okay, this is something that we have this goal. How do we generate a mechanic that will in some way support this goal? The other way you can do it is sometimes people come up with it on their own. Sometimes you don't even need to come up with it. Sometimes you need to flesh out the rules a little bit. But sometimes people will have things that they want their character to be able to do, or they might even have mechanical ideas for how the game could work, and they bring it to you, and you don't even need to do half the work. So one of the major examples that we had with this was one of our players had a magic mirror, and the mirror had been fractured at some point, and was something where there was very much a exploration of identity and who the person was, both as a character and as a player. And basically we just ended up being able to take this idea of, okay, this character has this item that is, again, but by the player's admission, based in their feelings related to exploring their identity, trying to figure out who they are. And we were very easily able to take that and say, okay, they have this item, it's currently fractured, they need to find the pieces of that item. So over time, we did, over the course of that particular group, we were able to say, okay, you're looking for these pieces of this item. We set up various challenges for finding the pieces of that item that were in various ways related to that search for identity, and that and various challenges that were determined in a way, or designed in a way that would challenge that particular player. And we very much, again, designed the whole thing based on what the client told us, this is what I want, both through the creation of that story arc and also through just literally explicitly telling us. So that was very much a way that we were able to integrate a lot of these concepts in a very easy to do kind of way, because again, a lot of it was just kind of handed to us. There was also a particular situation where sometimes the setting itself can be something where it takes on meaning for that person. Like someone suggested an isekai setting, or at least the setting was an isekai setting for that character, i.e. they had been transported to a different world from this world. And it was very much something where, for us, we didn't think too much of it at first, but then a lot of what that client was expressing was, okay, feelings of isolation or loneliness or feeling out of place with where they were at. And we were able to use the setting itself to explore those feelings in that way, just by nature of the fact that the person was expressing, yes, this has meaning to me. A lot of this is very much rooted in some of the core concepts of how these types of interventions work. A lot of this is very Bodhana model based, original trainings. A lot of it is based in that kind of core concept of, okay, you take what the client's giving to you, they pitch it to you, you kind of take it, maybe adjust it a little bit, or otherwise like play around with it a little bit, throw it back to them, and it cycles in that way. And it's very much something where by simply using that basic cycle between the therapist and the client, or therapist and the clients, you can very much take hints from that as to how you want to develop the different mechanics within your game. If you are adding mechanics onto your game, just literally thinking, okay, what is this character, what is this client telling me through the choices they've made with their character, or through literally just telling me this is what I want to see in the game.
Any questions about any of that before we move on? So, practice time. As we said, you guys get to practice designing them for yourself as well. So this is what Keir's referring to with, you get to see a little bit more of the self-care mechanic. This is literally what we write out and have given to players to play with. So as I was saying, you start with 10 self-care points. Over the course of one day in game, you lose 3 points just because life takes a toll. Other activities can decrease points as well, so meeting new people, battling different things, that can be specific to what the person is working on in particular. And then lower self-care does affect the rolls. So if you're at a 7 to 10, which is just normal day wear and tear, no effect. If you have gone a full day and don't work on any self-care, then that's when it starts to affect you. So you can see 5 to 6, a -1 to roll, 3 to 4 is a -3 to roll, 1 to 2 is a -4 to your roll. And if you hit a 0, which you have to try really hard to hit a 0, then you don't get any rolls or actions until you regain at least 8 self-care points. Take care of yourselves. It's very important. Very easy to do in a lot of ways, but you gotta take care of yourself. And then to regain points, you engage in different self-care activities. So we started off by saying that sleeping regains 2 points, and most other activities regain 1 point. We gave a couple examples here of bedtime or morning routines can be a way to regain points. We've had people come up with meditating. Someone had some absorb a burger through their hands, and that gives them a point. He was having fun with his way of doing stuff. We did have someone with little burgers were a theme in one of our groups. They had a fanny pack with a self-care cheeseburger anytime they rolled a 1 on it. So that helped with their self-care points. Different things led to self-care points, and as long as they could justify to us why it was self-care, go for it.
Sometimes you just need a burger.
Right?
Just eat a burger.
Sometimes you just need a burger.
Well, that's where the players of that campaign met for the first time was in a burger place.
There you go.
It was a theme.
Through line.
Yeah, it was a theme for that one.
Kind of like the bagels and everything everywhere all at once, but
Oh, yeah.
maybe less so.
Yeah. So, any questions on that? On the example there? All make sense? Okay, cool. So, some relevant themes for this. There can be many, many more, depending on what you say, but we threw a few up here for example. But they can be like confidence or self-esteem, coping strategies, self-care, teamwork and leadership, recognizing or expressing feelings, conflict resolution, and again, many more. We do have handouts for you, so that you also have an example of how we wrote out the self-care points while doing this. But yeah, it's practice time.
We could probably have them
Yeah.
join into groups and
Yeah.
then come back to
We weren't sure how the room was going to be set up, so we didn't know how we were going to do this. So if you want to like work on it on your own for a minute, or pair up with people and pick a topic, or yeah. So if you guys want to do that.
Self-care myself into a nap.
Yeah.
Like, social stuff, that's what, like, coming to poses, I mean, pick their favorite animals.
Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and come back together now.
All right, so we figured we would just kind of, at this point, discuss the various mechanics that you guys came up with, kind of get a sense of what people were thinking in terms of the goals that they had in mind, the ways of integrating those with the mechanics they came up with, etc. Is there any particular group that would like to start?
Hey, we will.
All right.
All right. So we're horrible at making up stuff, so we went with a real world thing we got going on. So with a specific group, there were some issues where we really needed to work on teamwork. And the kids were not working together in their game. This was a mostly non-therapeutic gaming setup, however, it can still apply. But one of the mechanics that we came up with, because you're having kids that were trolling, and you're having other kids that even wanted to do like PvP and this kind of stuff, and like they just wanted to create chaos as kids do. But one of the concepts that we came up with was like a reflective damage sort of thing, so that if and we thought of a couple different ways to introduce it into the thing, either a specific weapon or a curse that was put on them or what have you, so that anything you do to another, especially another in the group, will be visited back upon yourself. And one of the ways we thought that would be worked up would be like through a psychic damage. And so this is even if you get like some kid who's just like, I want to go psycho and slaughter all the kittens and puppies in the town. All right, well that's going to really leave a mark on you, because it's going to really mess with your head. So then you could do this kind of stuff, and it works something in there like the effects for your rolls, that kind of thing. Conversely, teamwork would lower DCs on stuff. So if two people were working towards a thing and could talk it out, like, my orc's now out of, my barbarian works out of spears, but I see the goblin player next to me. Are you cool with this? Yes, I'm cool with this. All right, he's going to like hoist him up and toss him to the big bad guy, and that way he can get a surprise attack, whatever aerial kind of thing. Oh, rule of cool, and then also we've got a lower DC because of it, and then it also sounds cool, and everybody digs it at the table, and it works.
I do want to just check in real quick, mic-wise. Is any of that able to be heard?
It should be.
Okay.
I was seeing.
Okay. Just wanted to double, as we're doing this, if I should like repeat it back.
We can bring it over to us, right?
You guys, if you guys want, you can speak directly into the mic. The mic should pick up at least everybody in the room to be like kind of understood. If you want, pick up the mic, and then we'll definitely be able to hear.
Loudmouth. So
Yeah.
one of the last things that, real quick, is that we thought that basically a concept of karma was going to go ahead and we could do something in there. So basically, the more negative things that a player character wanted to do constantly, that it would just wear down on their character, and then like suddenly maybe they wouldn't be able to heal, or that different things like that would you could just work it against them, or just as something you brought up, where basically you made like karma also worked as a luck thing. So then, like with an effect sheet. And then basically have them roll at different times. Don't expose exactly what's going on right then. Just wait, and then like if they rolled well, if there was good karma, you could have stuff happen to minor enemy characters, this kind of thing, or whatever, and just because if the kids are looking for something that is funny to happen or whatever, okay, we can have it happen to the minions that they're fighting or whatever, this kind of thing, and work it in that way.
And I think definitely it sounds like there was a big like kind of push and pull with like creating multiple mechanics to both de-incentivize negative actions and incentivize positive actions. Having antisocial, not in a clinical sense, but antisocial behaviors that end up having ramifications in the game, but also pro-social behaviors that have positive ramifications in the game. Definitely, it sounds like you came up with both those mechanics in a way that kind of, I can't think of a way to describe it, but like kind of like a railgun. You have the push behind and the pull in front, and it just, I would imagine, I can't say for certain because we're not practicing with actual people today, but I would imagine that would like slingshot the therapeutic progress.
One other thing real quick that was brought in here was basically, it was mentioned somewhere else that having a model for a behavior also is really good. And by, you actually ended up having another adult join in. It was kind of accidental, but when that adult came into the mix, because they were demonstrating like, this is how I want to play the game, and this is, I'm playing it the correct way, or what have you, that like, then it kind of, some of them fell in line a little bit more because of that. They're like, oh, okay, this is how it actually is. And this is right, now we're doing this for real, this kind of thing, as opposed to just goofing off or whatever.
Right.
So modeling would be another one, I guess, we could add there.
Oh yeah, and modeling can be in any sort of therapeutic group, especially a therapeutic role-playing group where, again, it's very practice-oriented. It's very much oriented around putting things into a perspective, like imagining what is happening, and sometimes with social skills, practicing it out. It can be very easy to model certain behaviors in that way, and oftentimes that can be very valuable in terms of literally showing this is a behavior that is something we want to encourage.
Right.
So, does anyone have any other feedback for this group? I don't know if you guys want to have like a team name or something, but if anyone has any feedback on any of that.
I was just going to say, it was kind of something that you said, but then I thought maybe it was different, but you talked about them sharing like a hit point pool, right? Like they got tethered together in some way.
Sure.
And it's like, so that in that sense, even if there's not like reflective damage or anything that complex, they have to protect each other because harm to any of them will impact all the others. So like really thinking about like who's the weakest one among us, like we have to keep them safe. And the person who's brash and always runs into danger, we have to collaborate to like, keep them from running headlong into danger, which is going to impact all of us.
I like that. Shared
Yeah,
goal.
we're really well.
Shared hit point. And yeah, I was thinking of it almost in terms of the self-care points. When that pool gets down to 0, you were just like non-functional. Yeah. Good, thank you.
Any other thoughts here for this group or any other groups that want to share?
Sure. So we were kind of dealing with like a similar concept. So we work at a school with a lot of neurodiverse, mostly autistic kids, and our group, we're working mostly on targeting like shared problem solving and communication, teamwork with them. They tend to want to like do a lot of things independently. And there are also we have a lot of young kids and kids with kind of like limited language, so we wanted to keep it really simple. So we developed like enemies that have tag team attack, which is, we've compared it kind of to like Menace and Magic the Gathering, where a creature can only be blocked by 2 or more creatures. So enemies who have tag team attack can only be, the attack only hits if 2 or more players attack, and they have to do it together. So they have to like talk about it together ahead of like in like a sidebar, and then come back to the group and explain like how they were going to take down the monster. So like very simple.
I
And I think oftentimes with mechanics, simple can be sometimes better. Occam's razor kind of thing. The more that you have with it, the more it can go wrong, or at the very least in this case, the less easy it is to understand. But I think having that kind of just, okay, you have to work together in order to achieve this goal, again, very much encourages what you're trying to encourage without having too many extra bells or whistles or anything like that.
Think of something like the Spark,
Spark sharing.
Very inspired by that for sure.
And it's like, the thing that was nice about that is you were talking about like they each use a die. But if you wanted to have some kind of outsized effect, like maybe instead of lowering the DC, you could do something like that where they both roll their normal 2d6, but then you use the highest die from each person, and that's like,
There's synergy benefits.
Yes, like it's always going to be to your advantage to collaborate with someone. That kind of thing.
Actually, that just reminded me, there's a mechanic that during this entire process of doing the presentation we forgot, because it wasn't one that we came up with like and deliberated on. It just kind of came about as a result of, I think someone asked, can I help another player? And we wanted to encourage that in the moment. So we literally just came up with a help action mechanic on the fly, where you would, or go ahead.
The person providing help rolled a die, and if that was higher than what the other person rolled, they can use that number to add in.
Oh, okay.
And it also talking about the extra die added in reminded me, with the affirmation magic, the way we incentivize that was you get to add a third d6 onto your roll. So it makes you want to do it.
Borrowing just like the bardic inspiration mechanic from D&D and just utilizing it. You don't have to be bard, it doesn't have to be D&D, but just the idea of like you can give someone an extra d6 for an action, but you have to like explain how are you helping them, like how is your character helping that character.
There was a, this might be a little bit of an aside, but there was an episode of Dimension 20 had a show called Dungeons and Drag Queens, and there was in one of the episodes, one of the characters, they weren't used to playing 5e, and so they said, well, I'm going to cast shield for them, and it was like, oh, you can't. Fuck it. Yes, that's now the rule. You can do that.
Yeah.
But that kind of like when it came up, that sort of like on the fly adjustment, and it was a super positive.
But if you want to see not technically therapeutic D&D, but a lot of like how to do therapy and D&D type things, Brennan is fantastic at that, and there are so many moments.
What is this?
Dimension 20 through Dropout.
What is it again?
Dimension 20.
It's a YouTube channel, or they have their own thing now
So
too?
dropout.tv is like their thing,
Yeah.
and that's where you can see all of their stuff or like within the system. There's a few things for free on YouTube, but you don't have all of the access.
They also use a lot of kids on bikes and kids on roofs.
Yeah, they had a really good series with that. They did a few different series with Dimension 20 that ran different themes, and they covered a bunch of topics. So they also have a really good diversity of people that are on board. Check it out.
Yeah.
Cool.
Any other comments on any of that, or whichever group would want to share next?
Good. Who wants to share next?
Do we have to start calling on people? We'll start calling on people, don't make us.
You took the best notes.
I am like the person that always speaks too much, so I would love if someone. You sure?
Yeah, so fine.
I'm going to try and pass the mic throughout this because I'm sorry for being me. But the basic idea, we were talking about a problem that came up in some of your sessions where there were some young women who were constantly taking on things for other people and neglecting their own sort of needs in the process.
Yeah.
And so the question was, is there a way, like a mechanic that could help reinforce personal boundaries, or that was the sort of initial thing. It also kind of works for time management. But the basic idea was to create a time limit for what needs to happen using something like a roll down die, where sometimes you just put like a D10, you just turn it over, every time something happens, and like when it gets to 1, you're done. But there's a time limit, and the DM, NPCs or other people are kind of coming over and saying like, oh, hey, like I need help with this, or I need help with that. And if you help them with those things without considering your own needs, then there's not ultimately going to be enough time for you to meet your own goals. But if you can look at what they need to have done, and you can find a way to complement it, like meet your own goals while also supporting or helping them, then you can accomplish the action without the extra cost, and maybe replenish your pool of like self-care points or something for doing that sort of social good. And what did I leave out? Did I leave out anything?
For clarification, are you talking about actual physical time, like a timer set, or are you talking about just in-game time,
Like
where
what I was thinking of, and this is where we were talking earlier, how like sometimes you think you're all agreeing, and then you're like, you're not really, like using the same word. Maybe it could be a timer, and maybe that, or like a sand timer.
no, I'm with you on this.
But I was thinking, like, have you ever done where you, like, you'll take a die?
you got like a spin down, so I mean, you're just like turning it, so
So it, like, and if they say, well, we're gonna go to the shop, it's like, okay, so you go to the shop, that takes about an hour. So like it could be something flexible, but that you're representing time as a.
So it is measured. It just does. It's not actual. Like you have 30 seconds to play this round, and you better get going.
Like you in game have a time limit to accomplish the thing you're trying to accomplish. If you don't get it done, you didn't accomplish your personal goal.
Understood.
We were talking about too how a variation on it could even apply to something like a board game, where instead of it being, say, like an NPC coming over and asking you a question, it could be something where it's like, say a building is falling down and you're inside of it, and so you have to get out, but on the way, you come across, like like with the board game, I think we were saying it would be player-to-player helping to like navigate the space. But like also if you were, like say that characters are trying to run out of a burning building, that would be back to the D&D or RPG thing. But, and then as you're getting towards the bottom, and apologies if this is triggering, like a baby was crying or something like that, that you might be like, I want to help them, but if I help them, I won't make it out, and then maybe they won't make it out. So how do I want to support those needs, but I have to account for my own needs in this as well.
The other thing we kind of talk about is that I really like is that you can kind of escalate the difficulty of the asks, so that you are actually building that skill of like, how do I assertively say no to something that I cannot manage.
That also works in a way at targeting executive functioning, of like thinking of like, before I take on this task, like what do I need to do to get to this task? Do I have enough time to do it? Like, do I need to ask for help? Like, just like all of those types of skills are built into those.
That's what, like, because we were starting looking at personal boundaries, and it was like, kind of works for it. Yeah.
Well, and that can also help with developing like different levels of boundaries, of like your rigid boundaries versus your more flexible boundaries. And I can't necessarily do the thing for me and for them, but what are the things I'll make an exception on? And being able to practice navigating that too.
I'm super excited to actually use this, which I'm going to start next week.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Also, on a somewhat related note, with like the time and like having to count down time, there's a particular role-playing game called Morkborg. I don't. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about. I don't know. It's not technically pronounced Morkborg, but also I'm not Swedish, so I'm not going to try to pronounce it correctly. But there's a mechanic in that game where every day you roll a die. The group chooses the size of the die, like D4, D6, D12, D10. And if you roll a 1, then an apocalyptic event happens. And if you roll a 1 7 times, the world ends, the game is over. Maybe not the best for a therapeutic group unless you're playing with, unless you, or maybe like an adult group, like a group where you think people would be down for it, then I think it could work very well in that. And also, the inspiration point equivalent is explicitly one where you can use it for the benefit of others. But it's a system that I would be interested to see if we or like
be made less toxic.
Yeah.
It's like a death metal album.
Yeah. It's very like heavy metal, like everything is ending, very high lethality rate. But
If you want to adapt that for kids,
oh yeah.
Did you
Like-
see the Duckburg version of it?
No, but I need to now. Thank you.
just adapt it instead of the world ending. It's Mom Comes Home. Make sure you check it out.
Yeah.
Before Mom Comes Home.
Yeah.
It's like rolling all your dice, and if they come out like Cthulhu,
Oh, so
Right,
it's not
pretty
board
it's in the world.
No, it's just
It means
it's like Dark Castle.
yeah, it means dark castle in Swedish, but also again, I'm not pronouncing it correctly. It's like M O with an umlaut over it, RK BORG is how it's spelled.
The other game that has a timing system that I haven't played it. I mean, like I know about it, but I haven't played the game. But it's Blades in the Dark.
Yeah, that's a clock system.
Yeah.
You make a clock for achieving certain things, and you fill it in with significant events, and when it's done, you get the whatever the output is. It's big on clocks.
But I would say, like, when you talk about like a rules-light modular system, more board, I think, like again, game is like the book is hyper-violent, hyper-aggressive, not safe for kids. Like,
Playing that tonight,
like,
guys.
you couldn't even put it in the room with them. Like that would be crossing a boundary. But the mechanics of it are very straightforward, and there have been a lot of people making adaptations to it, and there's absolutely nothing in the sort of mechanics of the game itself where you couldn't reskin it in a much more positive thing and just use its very simple methods of, like, there's a ton of randomization. A lot of abilities are tied up in objects. So it's like, if you want to be able to do something, it's like you have, like, it's like a object or like a scroll. You use it, it's gone.
Right.
So, like those can be really useful things, I think, in a therapeutic context if it's not.
Right, like resource management, yeah.
I won't even make a more important comment.
It's
not a safe.
version of that game called Death in Space.
Right. So we are running out of time, unfortunately. But
Table in the back.
yes.
You're shaking your head at me.
So I don't have any experience with tabletop or role-playing games. So I was relating how I can incorporate some of the therapeutic topics into board games by changing some of the mechanics. I've done things like adding rules where in Sorry, if you get sent back to start, then you have to talk about a coping skill, or when you get home, you talk about a feeling. With Uno, I know a lot of people do this, but with Uno, when you change the color or use a wild card, you associate that with a feeling. One thing for conflict resolution, when I was working with siblings, if we were playing a game and one sent the other one back to start, they would have to compliment the sibling that they sent back to start. So that turned into a pretty interesting conversation. I had to explain to them what a compliment was and how to use it. And then we talked about chutes and ladders was one. A lot of people don't realize, and a lot of people I work with don't realize, when you go up the ladder, it's because you make a good choice. When you go down the slide, it's because of a bad choice. So explaining that and giving examples of good choice, bad choice, especially for younger kids, was something that I've done. And then, what am I forgetting? We talked about Monopoly.
Yeah, we talked about Monopoly and how the houses can be a very interesting thing where you can, someone lives in a house that you can talk about like a conflict resolution instead of having to actually pay money. We also talked about a situation with kids on rooms with the falling forward mechanic, the adversity tokens, which the system's already there, and so you just translate it over and it works pretty well in our opinion. And as you kind of gain more and more, then you can also use them to help other kids with their tasks. It's kind of difficult sometimes to get 6 to 8 hours of sleep. But if they want to do the Batman situation where they only sleep, 2 hours, 3 hours at a time, then they're still getting something out of it, which they can then use and transfer over to help with something else.
Makes sense.
Yeah. A lot of good adaptations there. Just gonna move on more side. Yep. So just to quickly run through implementation, you guys did a great job coming up with stuff. So just to briefly touch on this, include whatever mechanic you're using into the rules guide at the beginning so that everybody knows what you're doing from the start. Remind them about it. Sometimes they forget, sometimes we forget. Remind them if it's not being used, remind them why it's helpful and they want to use it. Remind yourself why it's there. I like to call out us being, not having such sneaky therapeutic things in our therapeutic group sometimes, because it is a therapy group. And so if you remind them that that's there for some sort of therapeutic goal, perfectly fine. Not a big deal. You can laugh at yourself if that makes the children feel better about it. And then be open to adjusting it if appropriate. So that's if you come up with something and then the people you're playing with are like, hey, actually, this seems to be making more sense. Or if you just notice this is a little too complex and it feels right to do it this other way, be open to adjusting it and then just communicate about it. And incentivize the mechanic. Why is it helpful? And there's lots in there about how that, and what we've talked about today, of how those things are helpful. Thank you for coming. Do you guys have any other questions? Yep.
All right. Well, thank you all again for coming. This is our contact info if any of you want to contact us for any reason. And yeah, and make sure to fill out the evaluation forms and put them in the back. And thanks for being with us, y'all.